Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking. And I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, our guest is Dane Wigington. Dane is one of the preeminent geoengineering researchers in the alternative research community. Dane's website, which many are familiar with, is geoengineeringwatch.org, where our listeners can expand on their own research and understanding of what is really going on behind the geoengineering curtain. Our discussion was open and wide-ranging, covering geoengineering, of course, along with other facets of the control matrix. I think you'll find the interview, as I did, extremely fascinating. And to kick the show off, I asked Dane how he became involved in his research, and here is what he had to say.
I was forced to start researching and testing when I got to the Pacific Northwest and saw this stuff overhead. Now, to back up a little further, I grew up in an extremely smoggy inland empire, Southern California, where by the end of every day you had a hard time breathing because the smog was so bad they would cancel recess, cancel baseball games. My whole life I dreamt of getting out of that. And when you get to the Pacific Northwest, expect to find this clean, pristine air off the Pacific. And having a large off-grid home, my background in renewable energy, former Bechtel Power employee, and I was also licensed in California, Arizona, a licensed contractor, and you expect with a big off-grid home to have clear skies, solar power. I was losing 60, 70, 80% of my solar power on some days from whatever these aircraft were emitting. And clearly something was going on. They're flying in grid patterns. So my research led me to geoengineering. I started a test for what was in the rain to see if any of the elements named in geoengineering patents were showing up. I did not want it to show up. I hoped that something was not quite what it appeared to be. But sure enough, the primary elements showed up at the state lab where I did water testing for the precipitation. Continued to test. The quantities of these elements continued to climb rapidly. In fact, over a 5-year period, some elements, in the case of aluminum, climbed as much as 50,000%. So the rain is literally toxic. The air is toxic. The soils are being sterilized. I mean, at a certain point when you understand all this and the gravity of this, it's destroying the ozone layer, thwarting our hydrological cycle. At what point do you decide you're in a fight for life? We literally are in a fight for life. So not a job I wanted, Mike, but it's just one that I can't focus on anything else while this is going on. The gravity is too immense.
You know, I've spoken to other researchers, Dane, and they have done their independent studies as well, and they have concluded the very same thing. In fact, I had Claire Swinney on about a week ago or so, and she's out in New Zealand. She was running tests, and the same thing you had said, the aluminum is through the roof, the barium. Where I am in North Carolina, they spray virtually every single day. And by noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, it's a whiteout.
It's getting to be that way everywhere. And even the places, you hear from people sometimes who think that they're maybe being exempted on certain days, but it's still blowing in. Even those places where it's not so in your face, these horizon trails, they still have silvery white skies or the cobweb clouds, which are all aerosol related. So again, I know they do, depending on weather conditions and locations and where the jet stream movements are, certain places are getting hammered harder than other places. In the Pacific Northwest, for example, we get hit particularly hard also because the moisture moves across us and they don't want it to fall here. They're trying to migrate it further east. That's what they're doing. That's why we have unprecedented drought in California. So, yeah, certain places, because of their geographic location in relation to weather patterns, get hit harder. But nobody's exempt, as we talked about off the air for a moment. The study that was done in 2010 with 1,000 whales from around the globe. The exact quote in the report was jaw-dropping levels of aluminum, and this stuff's building up in all of us. So I know a lot of people have a lot of different issues they're working on, Mike, but I would argue this one should take precedent over all of them because this is literally the most direct and all-out assault on all life. If we don't deal with this, nothing else is going to matter.
Now, Dane, some of the audience are listening, and maybe they're just getting acclimated, and one of the questions they may ask is, why would they do this?
There's a couple initial responses I would have to that. First, because they can, because nobody's there to stop them. Just for the same reason these people do a lot of things they do. It all relates to power and control, ultimately. And people that are not mentally sane. There's no question about that, and I don't say that facetiously. So they can never satisfy their desire for power and control, and controlling nature is the ultimate lever, if you will, in that arena. So why did these same people go into the South Seas and take pristine tropical islands and blow them up? Literally, removing the native people, setting up ships like kids setting up toys. In one case, 185 fully functional warships were set up and blown up, just as part of some grand experiment. It's utterly insane. And 2,000 nuclear weapons have been detonated on planet Earth. 2,000. It's contaminated virtually everything that lives. Why do they do that? I mean, how does one answer a question that is completely unreasonable? So, because they can, because the populations are unwilling to stand up for the common good or to face certain unpleasant truths. So you have a power structure that is completely run amok. It's a juggernaut of total insanity. And their quest for power and control in this case will end life on Earth if it's not stopped. So it all relates to power and control and psychotic behavior, and there's really no limits to that until something reaches its natural end, where perhaps we'll reach the end of life on Earth, or people decide that they have to look past football games and Big Macs.
Do you see it as a grand experiment? In other words, they're using Earth and the people and the planet as guinea pigs and lab rats?
Well, there's no getting around that one. I mean, there's no other way to describe it, and there's no denying it. We are all test subjects at this point. There's no debating that one. And in regard to the contamination, what it's doing to us, there's no debating that one either. The contamination is there. We have, in Northern California alone, we have 6-7 dozen lab tests at the state lab. I mean, I just got off the phone an hour ago with the representative from California Department of Fish and Game that has now just informed me that they're finally, we've been sounding this alarm for 10 years, but they're finally admitting, Fish and Game, that they're finding aluminum running down all these waterways. What a surprise. And it would have showed up a lot sooner, but the state of California stopped testing for aluminum in drinking water in 2002. I mean, the system is virtually has been set up not to show this.
Right.
And it almost has to be to the point, Mike, where this is the astounding part with academia. Right now, everything on the environmental front is exponentially worse than what we're being told. The IPCC, the largest scientific panel on any subject in human history, people have probably heard the IPCC climate reports, one from a week and a half ago. They are so utterly and totally short of how dire our situation is that the reports are virtually worthless. You could get a 10-year-old to look at some data and come to a better conclusion. That academia at this point is literally, the ship could be at the bottom of the sea for 10 years, and they would have to study this before they would say, yeah, the ship had a hole in the bottom. Well, yeah, we know that. I mean, or they would have to see a house burning down and sift through the ashes for 10 years before they would say, yeah, that was a fire. I mean, why all these degrees and all these studies, and it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all smoke and mirrors. EPA, all these environmental protection organizations like EDF, we now know from a document I got a few days ago, EDF, Environmental Defense Fund, is completely in bed with the Royal Society. They're all bought, sold, paid for, and they're all going down with the ship, and somehow they must think they're on the inside circle, and they have a spot reserved in the underground bunker. Those bunkers won't do them any good. We're headed for a planet that will not support life at all, ever again, at least in any kind of future that matters. I mean, equilibrium periods after the last methane mass expulsions, which, by the way, is happening right now in the East Siberian Shelf. Methane is expelling from the seafloor with such ferocity, it's breaking up the multi-year sea ice, and there'll be no hiding this for much longer. So in the most recent methane mass expulsion event 55 million years ago, the equilibrium periods afterward were something on the order of 10 to 20 million years. Do these people have that much mountain house freeze-dried food stored up to last that long? I don't think so.
Yeah.
So we're headed for a very dark horizon if people don't get up off the bench and start to help with this issue. And if we could bring this one issue to light, it would bring a lot of other things with it. But this is the battle that must be won.
Now, Dane, with the government agencies, is it just compartmentalization? Is it corruption? Is it all of the above? Because what perplexes me is, where in the world do they think they're going with this? At the end of the day, when all is said and done, what's the end game?
Well, let's look at the overall behavior of the whole military-industrial complex. They don't look at the long-term horizon. I mean, they give their pilots drugs. In fact, fighter pilots, I've seen the studies on this, they give them uppers before they fly missions and downers when they get back, literally. So, I mean, this is their mentality. This is sort of the way they think. So if there's a problem, for example, that the climate is in runaway mode right now, I believe all available data indicates that, and I realize there's a lot of people who don't believe that yet, but they will. And this is, people have to get past their disdain for Al Gore and other things that have made them lock into a certain mental position that's not accurate, you know. I don't like Gore either, but the bottom line is there's a reality that needs to be faced. So with the military-industrial complex, the way they think is to try to hide something as long as possible. We saw in the Gulf of Mexico that mentality played out when they used Corexit. You know what Corexit was, Mike? The chemical dispersant they use in the Gulf?
Yes.
So, by all available reports, Corexit made that situation some 50 times more toxic than it would have been without the use of that disbursement. But the power structure doesn't care. Their goal is to hide the severity of the problem. In fact, there's some indications they may still be using Corexit on the seafloor because that well is still leaking. So, they don't care about the long-term consequences, only the short-term. So, in this case, if they can hide the severity of the climate disintegration as long as possible by creating engineered snowstorms in the east, and that's what they're creating, by the way. They're all engineered from bottom to top, and they make a lot of headlines with this. They have a lot of Weather Channel quote-unquote meteorologist stooges to read their scripts and to try to paint a certain picture of the world to make people fight about the climate, the true state of the climate, not realize the severity of the meltdown. It's a lot of smoke, mirrors, and confusion to try to keep business as usual as long as possible, to try to keep the populations from panicking as long as possible. And at the same time, they're preparing. We know they're stocking up with ammunition, right? You know, the 2.2 billion rounds?
That's right.
So it was ordered. So they're digging in, preparing, and trying to hide the situation as long as possible. And it works for a lot of people. I was on a national radio show a couple weeks ago, and a caller called in and said about me that I was losing all credibility because, referring to me, because anybody can see how cold it is in the world. Well, this is somebody who lives back east. Well, it might be cold where they're at, but the world as a whole, you can't support that statement scientifically, and I related it to this. Anybody from any place in the world can see that it's flat, right? If that's the extent of our field of vision, the world looks flat, but it's not flat. And so people need to look past their immediate horizon to look at the bigger picture and to consider the climate engineering is going on. And again, we know it is because we can see them artificially nucleating on the radar. You can see huge bands of rain flash out to frozen precipitation. People should know temperatures don't change as radically as we see them changing, these 60-degree fluctuations in one day. That's totally engineered. And the chemicals in the snow, or the frozen precipitation, match ice nucleating patterns.
Now, Dane, you mentioned the climate getting colder versus warmer, and there are those in the alternative research community looking at geoengineering who will say that the climate is getting colder, and they will point to their data and say it hasn't warmed in 17 years, whatever the number is. But your position is no, you're wrong.
Let me give you data that they will not be able to counter. They cannot counter. When they refer to climate getting colder, one, and I just posted data on this, I don't say anything without backing it up. You have almost $1 billion, billion with a B, from the Koch brothers, from ExxonMobil, and from others. And I posted the exact groups and exactly what they put into this equation to paint the picture of a colder climate with 200 plus think tanks and so forth. And when they put these data and graphs out, they don't match any of the data on the ground. They're simply fictitious. And I'm not in love with NOAA or NASA or any of these groups either. But here's some stats that you won't see from these other people. We've just passed the 38th consecutive year of above normal global temperatures, 346 months in a row above normal global temperatures. We have of the 10 of the warmest years ever recorded since 2000. These are stats you won't see these people talk about. And again, if anybody looks at this data, there's no disputing it. But the bottom line is, what's astounding to me, Mike, is even those in the alternative news community who admit to climate engineering, admit that they're engineering snowstorms, which has to affect the temperatures, they can't admit to the effect of that. The planet, even if the planet wasn't warming, and it is, how can people who acknowledge that they're geoengineering, acknowledge that 22 to 25% of the sun's direct rays no longer reach the surface of the planet from geoengineering? The snowstorms are engineered, which changes temperatures. How can they not admit to that effect?
Right.
Does that not seem like a paradox? And again, I challenge anybody. I don't want anybody to believe anything I'm saying. I beg people to look for yourself. Get past your disdain for Al Gore. Al Gore is the epitome of human hypocrisy. The epitome. But we have to still get at reality. We still have to get at reality. And look at the people who are funding the disinformation. And this is something important, too, for people to understand. Did the media at one point try to make sure we knew the planet was warming so they could saddle us with the carbon credits and so forth? Yes. They did.
Yep.
There's no question about that. And I'm not in agreement with the carbon credits. All that's a sham. Have they changed direction? Absolutely, positively. The situation is so severe now, they're simply trying to hide it. And anybody who watches Weather Channel, owned by Bain Capital, Rothschilds, I mean, it's part of the power structure, part of the geoengineering structure. If you watch Weather Channel for any length of time, you can't not conclude that their goal is to make it seem cold, to focus on that. While they were focusing on the geoengineered snowstorms in the east, they were not even talking about our empty reservoirs that were 20 degrees above normal day and night in total meltdown. I mean, temperatures that were just shattering records here every day. Not a word. Not a word. And you have that in so many places around the globe that, again, I just encourage people to look at actual data on the ground and consider that geoengineering is making an already bad situation exponentially worse. They can create short-term cooling events, but at the cost of a much worsened overall warming.
Yeah, the disinformation program is really, really entrenched, Dane. Just some simple things that some of the audience can acknowledge or take a look at. You mentioned the Weather Channel, and the local meteorologists will come out, do the weather report, and behind him is a screen. He's showing the weather and the temperatures and everything else, and behind him, he's showing a sky with trails behind him. Right? It's for conditioning. And it's for people to take a look at that and say, well, I see that every day, but it's not normal. People are not, I don't know, sometimes it really boggles my mind. They're not connecting the dots.
They're not connecting the dots at all. And this is what meteorologists are today. They're script readers. That's all they are.
Yes.
And their information is coming from on high. And whenever we see a forecast of, quote, mostly sunny, we know what that means here. It means not a natural cloud in the sky, just massive blanket spraying. We have those conditions right now while I speak. And this is getting to be the absolute norm. I mean, the day without spraying is almost not at all anymore. So, again, people need to find their backbone, especially people in the, quote, unquote, climate science community. I've never seen or even tried to, it's hard to even understand how such a huge group of quote-unquote academicians are so willing to toe the line for this insanity while the whole ship sinks. It's astounding to me. And on the climate issue itself, again, that will resolve itself soon. My goal is to expose and stop climate engineering, because everybody agrees on that. Even if people are still trying to figure out the true state of the climate, I don't think anybody argues that being sprayed like a lab rat is not in their best interest. And every single day this goes on, we're all losing our cognitive function, we're losing our overall health, and this is a very nonlinear equation. The body can take only so much, and then it breaks down. And we are, all of us, getting closer to that point.
Now, Dane, when you address folks that are in academia or involved in these programs, do you find that they are aware of it and they're afraid to talk, or it's so compartmentalized that they're oblivious? I can't imagine they're oblivious. I'm just trying to figure out, what do they say? How do they respond back?
There's a vast array of different reasons for their lack of speaking out. For example, with David Keith, he's the world's most recognized geoengineer. Ken Caldera will be next. I just posted an article today with a dialogue between Ken Caldera and myself, where he's staunchly denying that this is going on now, and I state this in the dialogue with him, that he has to be either clinically blind or he's lying. There's no question about the fact this is going on, and he can't not know. So for some people, I think they're either paid or threatened to lie. There's some that are simply so far in denial that they cannot face this, they will not face this. There's others that know what's going on, that simply, for reasons that are difficult to understand, can't bring themselves to actually do anything about it. I mean, again, some of the people I know with a few governmental agencies are aware this is happening, and they understand the significance to some degree, but yet they just go on about their life as if they don't have any responsibility to try to help. So it's all the above, but the bottom line is there's no mentally sane and mentally functional person that's in these various fields of meteorology, climate science, they can't not know unless there's something psychologically wrong with them. They can't not know. So I've had NOAA scientists, it was about 18 months ago now off the record, told me they are aware of these programs and that their exact quote was alarmed as hell, but they have no First Amendment protection. But I would argue even with them that if you know the ship's going down, at what point does your job no longer matter? At what point do you step out? And we've seen how much this administration is try to beat back any whistleblower on any front. So that's an issue. And we also don't know what families are being threatened. This is certainly an issue that they will try to hide to the last minute. But it's up to everybody to step forward. If we all step forward at once, they can't stop it. And I would argue if we reach critical mass of awareness, where enough people know about this, that people in academia fled from every corner to admit they know what's going on.
Yeah, that's the key, is critical mass. And, getting there is tough. But, I do believe we are making progress. More and more people are waking up to it. I know even in my discussions that I have with folks that, they're becoming more and more aware of it. Even if it's just, hey, the weather is very, very strange. I've been down here in North Carolina for 20 years. Over the last, I want to say, 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years, the weather has changed drastically. Dane, we were having days where it was 70 degrees one day, the next day it's 45. And then from 45 it bounced back up to 65, the next day it was down to 40. It was a roller coaster. And people are taking notice of this now because this is not normal weather where you have 15, 20 degree temperature shifts from day to day.
The climate system is coming apart right now. And people can deny that all they want, but it is. And they won't be able to deny it for very long. This morning, we had rain north of the Great Lakes into Canada while it was snowing in Texas. That's wrong. And they can nucleate material and make it rain. They can change what should have been a rainstorm into a snowstorm at temperatures of 50 degrees or even higher, and that lowers the temperatures on the ground. It creates a cold layer on the ground. Anybody who doesn't believe this is possible, look at the data that we post on geoengineeringwatch.org. I posted engineered snowstorms, what are they spraying? Lab tests included in that post, 2-minute short YouTube videos showing you the lab test of what happens when you put a few drops of a chemical ice nucleation agent into a beaker, freezes instantly, can drop temperatures up to 100 degrees in that beaker, and biological ice nucleating agents, same thing. A couple drops in a big container of water freezes it instantly. I mean, people can't even conceive of this unless you see it. It freezes the whole beaker instantly. You can turn it upside down, nothing comes out. So when we have patents for this process, specifically related to weather modification, ice nucleation for weather modification, that's the name of the patent from NASA. We have these elements in the precipitation. We see it snowing at 45 and 50 degrees. We know the materials in the frozen precipitation. How can we not believe this is going on? We can hear the aircraft above these clouds spraying. We can see it on the radar. I mean, this is the biggest elephant in the room by far. So as the climate system disintegrates, and it is right now, people will not be able to deny this much longer. And I would argue that we are close to the collapse of industrialized civilization. I know that that's a hard lump to swallow for a lot of people, but quite simply, if you look at the data, you can't not conclude that. So what I would argue is this: however dark our horizon is, and it's quite dark at this point, if this is the single greatest assault on Earth's life support systems, even if it's a given that civilization as we know it will collapse, if the Earth's life support systems are damaged beyond repair, it's game over. But if the planet was allowed to respond, no matter how dark things are, that's our best chance, period. That's our best shot at salvaging something out of this situation. So, yes, this is a very dire message, and I know a lot of people will simply reject it at face value. But they won't be able to reject it for long because these scenarios are unfolding. When they've seen, for example, contrary data, as you mentioned earlier, rightfully so. There is a lot of confusing data for people. But let's look at a headline from last September. I want to make the illustration, Mike, that just how spun the data is. Remember last September when they said the ice pack had increased by 50%? Remember that?
Yes.
Okay, let's look at how they built that headline. The ice extent, which is the surface area, not the mass or the volume. That's the only thing that really matters, but they didn't talk about that. The extent is only the surface layer that's covered by some sort of frozen precipitation, even if it's just a slushy. So they came up with that figure this way. The extent in 2013 of surface area, which is just a slush at this point, was 50% greater than the 2012 extent, which was almost no ice. The ice almost disappeared in 2012. Even though that was the fourth lowest surface extent area ever and the lowest ice mass ever, people think it's expanding. And it's a complete lie. It's a complete lie. In fact, the ice extent right now, today, depending on the study you look at, is either the lowest or second lowest on record ever. It's plummeting right now. And nobody talks about that. You don't see a headline about that. And that should indicate to people that they're trying to hide this. If they were trying to disclose this fact, and Al Gore and all the carbon credits, and they were the people that are trying to make you think it's warming when it's not, that would be headlines on every paper. And it's not. So I'm just saying that the data is so spun right now. We're seeing temperatures, high temperatures, official temperatures for the day recorded, are now routinely 5 degrees less than what actually occurred. They're underreporting to a degree that can barely be imagined. So we're much further into the curve than people understand. Does that make sense?
No, it does. Make perfect sense. So they've created such a mess
Yes.
that they have to continue to do what they're doing, to manipulate,
Yes.
in order to kind of keep it, in their minds, keep it together.
And keep it hidden as
Keep
long
it
as
hidden.
possible.
Right.
Yes, you're exactly right. Because I think when people realize, and the power structure knows this, when the population realizes they've been irreparably poisoned, when the life support systems their children needed to survive are now damaged beyond any return to what they were, how happy are those populations going to be? I would argue they're going to be looking for who to hang.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. And you know, Dane, the other aspect of this is, when I talk to people about it, it's not just the spraying and the aerosols, but it is the technology and the apparatus they have on the ground, like NexRad, the HARP facility, that type of technology which is used in conjunction with what they're spraying.
You're exactly right, and you cannot separate the two. And right now, as they ionize the atmosphere, as they make the atmosphere more conductive with these conductive particulates, that enhances the signal capabilities of the HARP facilities, ionosphere heaters. For those of your listeners that don't know what that is, HARP, the acronym is a little bit confusing. It's High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program. What these facilities actually do, and people might have seen it on Jesse Ventura, some of his shows or so forth, but there's about 26 or more of these large ground-based facilities, an unknown number of smaller ground-based facilities, but they're radio frequency transmitters. And in the case of HARP, up to 3 billion watts can be transmitted into the ionosphere. When the ionosphere is electrically charged, it causes an electrical chain reaction. So even official data indicates that they can heat the ionosphere to tens of thousands of degrees Fahrenheit over huge areas, hundreds of square miles. This causes a bulge in space. They can maneuver the jet stream with this. Now let's say if there's 26 of these facilities and maybe more opposing countries with these facilities, so the tug war of the atmosphere ensues, and they're quite simply ripping the planet's life support systems apart. And the maneuvering of the jet stream is so clearly visible. You have meteorologists scratching their heads, completely perplexed at jet stream patterns. They're totally anomalous, and they just can't bring themselves to face this elephant in the room of climate engineering. It's astounding at this point. I mean, it's a giant elephant that's trashing the whole place, and they just can't bring themselves to see it. So as this continues now, the radio frequency transmitters, we're all more conductive as well, Mike, because we're absorbing these particulates. So it affects us more severely. And then when you see what they can do with these ionosphere heaters, and this sounds very sci-fi, what I'm going into now, but it's data indicates there's solid validity to it. Yes, they can heat the ionosphere, but if they bounce that signal off the atmosphere back down into the planet in a seismically sensitive zone, the vibrations that those low frequencies can create appear to be able to create seismic activity in the right location. Now, the Japan quake, I've shared before what I was told 3 days before the quake by someone who had a relative in Army intelligence. This person lived on the California coast. They called me 3 days before and said their Army intelligence relative told them to be away from the coast the following Friday. Had I heard of anything? And my answer was no, and you hear about things like this a lot, so I didn't pay it much attention. And my wife heard it too, luckily, or she wouldn't have believed that I was told this. But that Friday when the quake happened, I was shocked. Now, to add a little more credence to this, General Burt Stubblebine, the highest-ranking U.S. general to speak out about 9/11. He's a friend. He's a personal friend that has told me that it's his understanding that this quake was triggered, that Japan was starting to ally with its regional partners, which would be a pull away from the U.S.
Right.
This was a shot across their bow. Fukushima was not intended. I mean, I can't imagine that they would intend to create an event that may end all life on Earth, but when you trigger 9.0 quakes, things happen, right?
Right.
So this is the mentality of these people. They just keep kicking the bull in the backside to see what will happen. Project Starfish, are you familiar with that, Mike?
No, I don't think so.
Detonation of hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere.
Oh,
60?
that I do know about, yes.
What sane person or group of people would do that just to see what would happen?
Exactly.
So we're in a bad situation here, and the consequences are total. But I would argue again, if there's a fight worth throwing in with, it's this one. And if we could bring this to light, it would drag everything with it. People would realize they're not only expendable, they're a liability, and they're being experimented on with known toxic elements, probably a whole lot more unknown, and that the consequences are total if this continues.
Do you get into the discussion point, Dane, where some are saying that the aerosol spraying program has a lot to do with transhumanism, altering DNA, the biological structures of humans, and so on?
I'll say this, that you know Sophia Smallstorm probably.
Yes.
And I know Sophia well. I like her. I respect her. I think there's probably a lot of validity to her work in that we know that because these elements are bioavailable, they're being uptaken from Norwegian researchers that I work with and German researchers. They're communicating that they're seeing horizontal gene mutation in all plant life. We're seeing mutated plants in the forest of the Pacific Northwest. No question we are. Absolutely no question. So why wouldn't this have the same effect on us?
Right.
Now, the point I would be still a little more skeptical on is how exact whatever they're maybe trying to accomplish. I think it's very haphazard. It's just like the weather modification. It's not, they can consider it controlling the weather. I would consider it completely disrupting the weather. It's not anything with any sort of exact results, if you will. So, yes, I think it's probably affecting our DNA, but for most people, the reason I don't go into that conversation too much is for most people, the common man, if he knows he's being poisoned, that his grandparents' Alzheimer's and dementia, and maybe their sons or nephews' autism is likely a direct result of this. If it's killing their soil's ability to grow, disrupting their rainfall patterns, toxifying every breath they take, that's enough to mobilize most people, if they can get that far. If too much is given to them, it simply overwhelms their ability to deal with this situation. A lot of people can just shut down. So I think the point is, if we can get across to people this is indeed going on, those that are capable of looking at Morgellons disease or the genetic ramifications, those that are capable of looking at those issues will. They'll find their way down the rabbit hole. But at least up front, I think the point we need to get across is these programs are happening. They're poisoning virtually everything. They're tearing the planet's life support systems apart. Ozone layer, for example, is being totally decimated. Anybody who feels a direct shot of clear sunlight in their face certainly should feel the intensity of it. And all the things that allow life to exist on this planet are being thwarted.
You know, I agree with your assessment that you need to keep this at the level it's at right now. If you go too far down the rabbit hole, you're just going to lose people, because we can't even really get a lot of people to understand that they're being sprayed. You know, and what I tell people, look, these are the same folks that fluoridate your water. They'll tase your grandmother. They're reading all your communications. And why would you not believe that they wouldn't spray you? So it goes back to what you said before. These people that are doing this, they are not of sound mind. And they have no empathy. And the planet and the people are lab rats. And to what end? I don't know.
Well, I can tell you where we're headed, you know, based on all available data. I mean, we're headed very quickly to Venus syndrome, and we're a lot further on that path than people understand. And again, how many examples do we need to back up what you just said? How many examples do we need of our government doing exactly what we are trying to point out they're doing in the sky? From depleted uranium, use in the ammunition, which poisons our own troops, Agent Orange in Vietnam, the dozen or so known instances of our government experimenting with pathogens on their own populations. Or, as mentioned earlier, I think, are the nuclear explosions when they send our own troops out to watch a nuclear explosion like they did in the 40s, put a set of goggles on, take a look. No big deal. They just wanted to see what would happen.
Unbelievable. Yep.
And so how many examples do we need before people realize this is real? It's going on. Denial won't save you. It won't exempt you from what's coming. Join the fight. Join the fight now while there's still something to fight for.
You know, you mentioned the 2 billion rounds of ammo before, and I was just going to ask you, because I know you're out in California. Were you listening in on the Nevada ranch standoff with Clive Bundy? Yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's another example where if people want to know what they're doing with the rounds, take a look at what the BLM was doing there. Again, in the vein of what you and I were talking about, there's so many examples out there of not good stuff that the government is involved in. How much more do we have to point out before people start to wake up?
Well, again, we're heading toward, in the coming months, radical escalation in food prices, diminishment in food availability. It's here. You have 36 or so countries around the globe descending into chaos right now because they're running out of resources. And you have a lot of people in denial about this. I hear even these, quote, progressive environmental people, and nobody cares about the environment more than I do. But the bottom line is you have to look at this sensibly. If the house is burning down, you don't go out and mow the lawn. You put the house out. So I've heard environmentally minded people say, well, the planet could support 15 billion people. We just need to all have a garden in our front yard. This is just Pollyanna thinking. You can't support that many people on a planet without a whole lot of fossil fuel. When you burn those resources, that's a very short-term ability to support that life. I mean, we went from a billion people in 1900 to 7 billion today. How can anybody think that could continue? We have oceans that are virtually dead. 90 to 95% of global pelagic fish populations gone. How can anybody think this is going to continue? Rationally, it's not going to continue. So in the case of the law enforcement that carried out, and this is a key part of this whole equation. This is why I've tried to state over and over that, a lot of people get fired up against the whole military and they start saying militant things, and that's not going to help us. We need those people on our side. And these people are not being told the truth. They're not. I was with some law enforcement friends of mine yesterday. That's with actually city police and county sheriffs. And they're my friends. And I brought up the ranch in Nevada issue. And clearly what they had been told and what they believe at this point is that whole situation was the fault of the ranchers. That they were somehow illegally on that land, didn't pay their fees or something. I mean, they were fed a pack of lies.
Right.
And we need to, as effectively and gracefully and diplomatically as we can, reach out to people like my law enforcement buddies to help them to understand that they're being lied to. They're absolutely being lied to. And if we can make sure that we keep them on our side and try to bring them to the point where they understand they're being used as pawns in this game and they're just as expendable as the rest of us. That's what we need to have happen. So people need to educate. They need to know what they're talking about and go about this in a manner that reaches out to those people like law enforcement and military and not alienate them. Because I've been into recruiting offices, for example, Marines, Navy, Air Force, Army, and talked to the men and women there about the climate engineering issue. And they're very gracious. Very gracious to me. And I simply said, I salute your service. There's some things I don't think you guys are being told. We're just trying to get the word out. I'm part of a research group. We need to approach things in that manner so that they're on our side.
Well, we really need to get them to critically think, because the problem I have, Dane, I agree with you 100%, by the way, but along with being lied to, they then invoke levels of violence which are just inhumane in many cases. Tasering people at will. In that ranch in Nevada, about a week or two before, they shot a boy in the back. So these are some of the issues that we have to overcome. They have to critically think. They have to start understanding what's going on here, that there's an agenda, and they are actually being used to implement the agenda. That's the thing. They're being used.
I don't argue what you're saying, and it's a fact, and there are, unfortunately, plenty in law enforcement and military that I don't feel very benevolent towards, and that they're quick to carry out unbelievable acts. And there's no excuse for that. There's simply no excuse. But there are people within the system that do not condone this. We need to reach them. Hopefully they'll be able to reach these people who are more entrenched in an ideology of violence. And it's astounding, the pepper spray that they shot some of the Wall Street protesters with on the university. I remember the one cop that was just spraying it in their face.
Right down the line. Yep.
Yeah, and there, people like that should be locked up and thrown away. They don't belong in society. They certainly don't belong with a uniform. And Scott, I can't think of his name, the veteran who got the canister in the head, gave him brain damage, Occupy Oakland. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, I can't either, but I know what you're referring to. Yep.
Yeah, and even as people tried to help him on the street, they shot another canister at the group of people who were trying to assist him. And we see these examples all over. When you have an American population that seems to ignore, for example, drone strikes that kill maybe 50 in a wedding party,
right,
that weren't doing anything. I mean, where's the sense of outrage? Where is it? I don't know, but I would argue this, though. If we continue to plant seeds, and we continue, even for people who don't accept it yet, on the climate engineering as being a catalyst issue, a primary issue for the wake-up that's necessary, as their lives start to crumble, and they are crumbling right now. People can ignore it, but they're crumbling now. The economic system is imploding, farm production is imploding, ocean harvest is imploding. This party's not going to go on much longer. So if we can sow those seeds right now so people have some understanding of what the hell happened, at least we can change the dynamics of what we face.
I agree. And, Dane, I know you are and I am going to just keep plowing ahead, because the word has got to get out there, and we have got to get people to understand what's going on. So, my point with regard to the police and the military is not to say that, they're all doing bad things. There's a lot of good people there. But I wanted to ask you a question, though. You had mentioned much earlier in the interview about the drought in California. And I have seen some pictures, and I've taken a look at what's going on out there. And, I don't think most people even know the devastation from the drought out there. Could you just talk maybe a little bit about that, because that's in your backyard?
It's cataclysmic. I mean, I live in a boreal rainforest that got 70 inches of rain a year. 10 years ago, it was an explosion of life here. From the birds, the turkeys, the deer, the bear. The forest is virtually silent now. Dead trees everywhere. You can see through the forest. What was closed canopy is now wide open, so the sun beams through. The fir trees are about a third of their foliage they were, the ones that are still alive. Many are dead already. Reservoirs are empty everywhere. And this is such a simple 2 + 2 = 4 equation. We know they're blocking the hydrological cycle from us here. We have satellite images of blanket spraying in the eastern Pacific, which thwarts the hydrological cycle. I mean, the images are so clear of these grid patterns off the coast, it slaps you in the face. And this is, if the moisture moves across, there's two methods they can block the moisture here, Mike, and that they are blocking the moisture. They can set up a high pressure zone, which they have, with the use of spraying and the ionosphere heaters. They divert the jet stream. They can do whatever they want with the jet stream at this point, it appears. So they keep it locked going north into Alaska. Now, as the lower 48 was freezing in January, I don't know if you know this, Alaska had its warmest January on record. Did you know that?
Yes. Yep. I actually did see that.
So a lot of people didn't. So they don't realize the Arctic was much warmer than the lower 48. So they pump this moisture up through Alaska. They're nucleating it to cool it down. Alaska, of course, warmed up just like we did. So they block the moisture from coming into California. They divert the jet stream north through Alaska, back down over the lower 48. In this parade of engineered snowstorms over the same location again and again and again, so they can tout their headlines. Record snow in this location and that location, which is the tiniest fraction of the bigger picture, but that's what they focus on. So they can block, with high pressure zones, any moisture from coming near California. If the moisture does come across us, they nucleate the hell out of it, and they aerosolize it. So they can migrate that moisture. You put too many condensation nuclei in the atmosphere, the little particles, that causes the moisture to not combine and fall as rain, but to migrate. So from both methods, now my boreal forest, instead of 70 inches a year, we had about 25 this year, 25 inches. And in between that, because these particles are desiccants, they absorb all available moisture. So there's no dew. There's no moisture in the atmosphere. We have single-digit humidity numbers in a boreal rainforest. With last year, we had up to 110 degrees, single-digit humidity, and 30-mile-an-hour winds. It's like living in the Sahara.
So you lost 50 inches of rain a year?
This year, we have. Now, here's another way they screw the equation. Normally, we get 2.5 times, almost 2.5 times the rainfall of the local city in Redding. But now all that's changed because they aerosolize. Now we don't have the same ratio of rainfall here. the orographic enhancement as the rain moves over the mountains, which is where I live, not as much falls out because it's been aerosolized. So instead of getting well over 2 times the rainfall of the local lower land city, we get just a little more than they do. So it changes the ratios. Do you follow me? So in the last 7 years, we're short where I live about 200 inches of rain. 200 plus. You can't make that up.
No, that's unbelievable.
It is unbelievable. So, and you try to get the attention of people. I had a meeting in the state capitol with the lieutenant governor about 8 weeks ago, and his aide. I presented a lot of data. I think he understands the situation to some degree, but his paycheck is coming from the central banks. Literally, in California, there's a $30, $40, $50 billion a year deficit that's being covered backdoor through the central banks. There's no question it is. Where does that deficit go every year? It just disappears and everybody forgets about it. The central banks are keeping the entire system afloat, keeping everybody on the payroll. That's how they control the entire system. From agencies like EPA, Fish and Game, they're all controlled because the money's all coming from one place, period. And the economic conditions, you have the whole system being kept afloat there too. I don't think anybody can argue that at this point. The whole economic system is being kept propped up by printed Fed fiat money. You have companies like GM that are literally they're buying their own cars to make their bottom line look better. It's a snake eating its own tail. And it won't continue much longer. It can't. We have to expose the aerosol issue so that the planet's life support systems can function while we can. And on that note, whenever you're ready, there's some good tools people have to help us bring this to light. And I'd definitely like to go over that.
Yeah, let's go through that.
Let's start with, certainly on our site, geoengineeringwatch.org, we try to present data. You don't see any ads on our site because I don't want to detract from the data. So we just try to stay with hard science people can use for a tool there. Another tool, skyderalert.com, SKYDER alert.com. That site was built by a filmmaker named George Barnes. He's a great guy, good friend. He's put a lot of resource into this. He considers it the same gravity that I do. That's a downloadable app that can alert the legislatures in your area whenever you see spraying. You can use that app to send them photos and alert them. It's probably one of the best tools we have right now. George also did a film called Look Up, and that film's available through that site. I think it's won 8 or 9 awards, narrated by William Baldwin. So SkyderAlert.com app, another great tool. And what we put on Geoengineering Watch, on the front page, left side, there's activist suggestions. There's a flaming arrow package, which is a prepackaged email intro letter with links, so the people have something all set up they can send out to groups, organizations, individuals who would care if they knew. A lot of people, amazingly, still have never even heard the word geoengineering or climate engineering. They have no clue. They don't look up.
Yeah, that is amazing.
It is. It is, but we have to change that. We have to change it quickly. And at this point, if everybody pulled together, we could reach critical mass, and we have to. We must, and soon.
Do you know anything about, Dane? I thought Michael Murphy was going to come out with, I think the next installment was Who in the World is Spraying? Do you know anything about that?
I don't think that film's going to happen, ever. And I tried to help Michael with the first 2 films, and I was friends with him for a long time. I think he's got some substance issues that I hope he gets a handle on, and I hope for the best for him. I pray for him, and as far as I know, the last I've been told, those films are not going to happen.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. A little bit of a surprise and a shame at the same time, and let's just hope that Michael gets better, and we'll send our prayers out to him. All right, Dane, I know we're approaching the hour here, and I don't want to take up too much more of your time, and but I want to say that it was an absolute pleasure. It really was. I mean, I could talk to you for an hour more. There's just so much here that, but I really do appreciate you taking the time.
I feel the same gratitude. Without people like you, Mike, we wouldn't have a voice. No matter how much research we did, no matter how much data we had, we would not be able to get it out. And it's imperative that people like you help us get it out. And I'm very, very grateful for you focusing on this issue as well. And if we have anything to update with or anything, I'll try to communicate that with you, and we'll try to keep you abreast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Dane, so much. I'll get it on the radio show. It'll go up on my YouTube channel. I'll send you a copy of the link so you can put it up on your site if you'd like.
Sure,
and
absolutely.
We'll get the word out. And, if you want to come back, if I contact you again in about 6 months, would you mind coming back
Absolutely. No, absolutely. No need to wait. I think things are going to be happening very, very quickly from here. So keep your eye on the horizon and try to take a look at some of the data whenever I post on articles, for example, that relate to the state of the climate and its connection to climate engineering. I cite link after link after link after link. And so, if you even look at the headlines of some of those links, it'll start to make the picture clear as to exactly what's going on right now.
Yeah, your site is great. I go there often. It's a fantastic site.
Well, it could always be better, but we're doing our best, I assure you. And again, I'm very grateful to you for helping us to get the word out, Mike.
Thank you again so much, and I'll keep in touch, and have a great evening.
You too, my friend.
And that concludes my interview with Dane Wigington. I hope you enjoyed the discussion as much as I did. Dane's website again is geoengineeringwatch.org, and I highly recommend everyone visit the site and learn a lot more about what was discussed during this show. I would like to thank everyone as always for listening and for visiting the blog, sageofquay.com. Also, please take a listen to my album, Leaving Dystopia, at laboroflovemusic.com. And remember, live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.